Some stories are too important to let fade. Ilara, a young storyteller from the coastal village of Ethel, grew up listening to her grandmother's hushed tales of the Forgotten Isles, a place whispered to hold ancient, peaceful legends. But as her grandmother's memory began to fade, so did the details of those stories, vanishing like mist over the sea. So she makes a choice that will define her life, risking everything she knows to sail for those myth-shrouded islands and find the truth before it is lost forever. By the end of this journey, you will discover how a single voice can save an entire world from being forgotten. What secrets lie hidden within the Isle's unnerving silence, and what will it cost one person to bring them to light? I am curious to know, where in the world are you listening from right now, and what is the local time for you? What does it feel like to risk everything for a story you believe in? The sea around her offered no resistance, a glassy plain beneath a low-hanging mist. Ilara's small boat cut through the water with a whisper, its passage guided by the faded constellations sketched on her grandmother's charts. She expected turbulent waters, jagged rocks, some tangible test of her courage. Instead, a silent, unseen current gently took hold of the hull, pulling her forward with an impossible gentleness. Her oars became useless in her hands as the mist parted to reveal a shore of sand that gleamed with a soft, internal light. The boat grounded itself without a sound on that shimmering beach, and the moment her feet touched the strange, silent sand, she felt a definitive click of separation from the world she had left behind. An immense and profound quiet pressed in on her from all sides. It was not merely an absence of noise, but an active, breathing silence that absorbed the very idea of sound. Where were the cries of gulls, the rustle of wind through leaves, the crash of waves she had just sailed upon? This eerie stillness directly contradicted every story of peril she had prepared for, seeding a deep, unsettling doubt within her. Had her grandmother's tales been merely the fancies of a fading mind? Was this place simply empty, its legends as forgotten as its name? The choice was stark, laid out before her on that luminous beach. To turn back now, to fight the current and return to a village of dying stories, or to press forward into the unknown quiet. With a resolve that felt both foolish and necessary, she turned her back on the sea and began to walk inland. As she moved, the stakes of her choice became terrifyingly clear. The charts in her hands, her only tether to the known world, seemed to shift. The ink lines depicting the coastline wavered, as if the parchment itself was breathing, subtly redrawing the land to match her new reality. The islands were not a static place, a mere setting for a story. They were alive, aware, and reacting to her every footstep. This was not a quest for knowledge, but a conversation with a sentient world, and she had just spoken her first uncertain word. The shimmering sand shifted under her boots, and from the deep emerald darkness of the forest ahead, a soft, melodic hum began to weave through the silence, a single thread of sound pulling her irresistibly forward. The melodic hum resolved into a symphony of whispers as she stepped beneath the canopy. It was not the wind through the leaves, but the trees themselves, their ancient bark giving voice to splintered echoes of tales. Fragments of conversations, half-remembered songs, and the names of stars, long fallen, swirled around her. She had to quiet the frantic beating of her own heart, the ingrained skepticism of her village upbringing that screamed this was all an illusion. But she had come for stories, and so she listened, truly listened, pushing her own doubts aside to focus on the overlapping threads of sound. One phrase began to repeat, a ripple of intent through the arboreal chorus. It was a simple string of syllables that felt old as stone, speaking of unity and gentle strength. The weavers, she understood, this was their story. Taking a steadying breath, she spoke the phrase aloud, her own voice, a strange and fragile instrument in the whispering woods. The forest floor responded instantly. Where her words fell, a tracery of moss at her feet ignited with a soft, green-gold light. The luminescence pulsed once, then streamed away from her, unspooling like a liquid thread into the deep shadows, marking a clear path forward. Her rational mind recoiled. This defied every law she knew, yet the evidence was undeniable, glowing beneath her feet, a direct answer to her spoken word. This was the tangible power of the legends, a magic that did not command or destroy, but simply illuminated the way. The choice was upon her again, more profound than the one on the beach. To trust the map of glowing moss was to abandon the world of logic she had always known. She looked from the shifting, uncertain chart in her hand to the unwavering, brilliant path on the ground, and made her decision. She would follow the light. As she walked, the whispers grew clearer, the broken narrative weaving itself into a more coherent whole. The weavers were not rulers or warriors, but guardians who had woven peace into the very fabric of the Isles, a delicate balance maintained not by force, but by profound understanding. And that balance, the voices murmured with a new urgency, was now fragile, stretched thin by a long, deep silence from the heart of the island. The stakes were no longer just about preserving a story, but about the survival of the peace the story described. The luminous path led her onward, out of the dense thicket, and into a sudden, vast clearing. Here, the air itself seemed to thicken and shimmer, like heat haze on a summer day, and within that shimmering veil, the faint, colossal outline of a great, dormant stone structure began to resolve from the emptiness. The colossal shape was not a structure at all, but a creature of living stone, a great turtle, its shell a landscape of moss and weathered rock, slumbered so deeply it had become part of the clearing itself. This was the Sentinel her grandmother had whispered of, a guardian of such age its sleep was measured in centuries. Ilara approached with a reverence that stilled the breath in her lungs, her footsteps silent on the soft earth. The whispers of the forest returned to her then, the phrase for unity and gentle strength, echoing in her mind, along with a new understanding. The Sentinel was not broken, but clouded, its purpose obscured by the passage of endless seasons. She saw them then, carved into the great stone plates of its shell, runes so choked with dirt and moss they were nearly invisible. This was not a task for force, but for care. Using water from her flask and the soft cloth of her sleeve, she began to clean the ancient glyphs. It was a slow, patient ritual, her movements gentle as she uncovered each curve and line. With every rune she revealed, a soft, amber light began to pulse within the stone, a slow, sleeping heartbeat growing stronger. The final rune, a spiral that represented the Heartstone itself, glowed with a sudden, gentle intensity, and the entire clearing seemed to inhale. The Sentinel stirred. It was not a violent awakening, but a profound shifting of the earth, a deep, resonant grinding of stone against stone as its head, larger than her boat, lifted from the ground. Its eyes opened, not with the fire of a monster, but with the deep, patient light of ancient stars. There was no aggression in its gaze, only a vast, questioning curiosity fixed entirely upon her. A cold fear gripped Ilara's heart. She stood before a myth, a being of pure legend, and the weight of its attention was terrifying. Every instinct told her to run, that her human presence was a disruption, a potential harm to this perfect ancient balance. Her hand trembled as she reached into her bag, her fingers closing not around a weapon, but around her grandmother's star charts. She unrolled the parchment, holding it up for the Sentinel to see, a gesture of shared knowledge and fragile trust. She pointed to the shifting ink, the coastlines that refused to stay still, the stars that had wandered from their positions. The great stone head lowered, one luminous eye studying the chart. Then, the Sentinel did something she could never have anticipated. It let out a low, resonant hum that was not a sound heard with the ears, but a vibration felt in the soul, and a vision bloomed behind her eyes. She saw the Heartstone, a pillar of crystalline light at the center of the Isles, pulsing with a harmonious energy that wove through the land, the sea, the very air. But in the vision, the light was flickering, growing dim. Deep, hairline fractures were spreading across its surface, and with each pulse, the light grew weaker, the harmonious song of the islands fading into the silence she had first encountered. The collapse was not a distant possibility. It had already begun. The peace of the Forgotten Isles was dying, and its gentle magic was unraveling. The vision faded, leaving her breathless. The Sentinel's gaze was heavy with a silent plea. The choice was made. There was no turning back now. With a slow, deliberate nod to the ancient guardian, Ilara accepted the unspoken quest. The great turtle turned, its massive limbs moving with a geologic slowness, and began to lumber toward the island's dark interior. She fell into step beside it, the ground trembling softly with each of its footfalls, a rhythmic drumbeat guiding her toward the fading heart of the world. The river appeared as a ribbon of silver, its surface unnervingly still. It did not reflect the sky or the surrounding forest, but something else entirely. As Ilara drew closer, she saw the water was a living canvas, showing scenes of the islands in a time long before her own. Great, gentle beasts she had no name for drank from its banks, and figures robed in light moved among them, their hands extended in gestures of peace. These were the weavers, not as echoes in the trees, but as they truly were. The Sentinel halted at the water's edge, its massive head dipping in a clear, unspoken directive. To reach the Heartstone, she would have to cross this river of memories. She stepped into the current, bracing for a chill that never came. The water was as warm as breath, and the moment it touched her skin, the vision ceased to be pictures on the surface and became the world around her. She was no longer wading through a river, but walking through a memory. The air hummed with a palpable sense of accord. She watched as a weaver placed a hand on the flank of a great, horned creature, and a simple, profound understanding passed between them. A pact of mutual guardianship, written not in words, but in shared feeling. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over her, so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. This was the foundation of everything, the peace her grandmother's stories had only hinted at. It was real, and it was beautiful, but the river held more than one memory. The current shifted, and the warm joy was violently swept away, replaced by a crushing tide of sorrow. The scene around her fractured. She saw the weavers, no longer united, standing in two separate groups. Their postures spoke of a deep, fundamental disagreement, a schism over how to best preserve their fragile peace. The emotional weight of their conflict hit her like a physical blow, a despair so profound it threatened to pull her under the water. Her instinct was to fight it, to scramble back to the bank and escape the anguish. This was not the story she wanted to find, yet she forced her feet to remain planted in the soft riverbed. She remembered her grandmother's fading voice, the fragments of tales that were sometimes happy, sometimes sad, but always true. To only seek the light was to misunderstand the story completely. The pain was part of the history, part of the balance. With a shuddering breath, she made a choice. She stopped resisting the sorrow and instead opened herself to it, allowing the memory of the schism to flow through her, to be felt and acknowledged. It was a terrible, hollowing experience, but as the vision passed, she carried a new understanding. The peace of the Isles was not a static, perfect state. It was a choice, remade every day, and it had been born from overcoming discord, not from the absence of it. Climbing out onto the far bank, the water dripping from her clothes seemed to hold the weight of centuries. Her quest was no longer an academic pursuit. She had felt the joy of creation and the ache of division. She now felt personally, deeply responsible for helping to mend that ancient wound. The Sentinel was waiting, its stony gaze no longer fixed on her, but looking past her into the valley below. There, nestled between two sloping hills, a soft, rhythmic pulse of light emanated from a source hidden by the trees. It was the Heartstone, its glow weaker and more erratic than in the vision it had shown her, a fading heartbeat in the chest of the world. The air in the valley was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming night flowers. Ilara followed the Sentinel until the great turtle halted at the edge of a glade, illuminated not by moon or sun, but by a soft, silver light that seemed to emanate from the air itself. Within the clearing, figures moved. They were not solid, but composed of shimmering, translucent light, their forms shifting like mist over water. These were the echoes, the first storytellers, and they moved in a slow, graceful dance, their silent mouths shaping words that hung in the air like visible breath, forming a tapestry of swirling, glowing script. The pressure of their presence was immense. These were the original voices, the sources of the legends she had risked everything to find, and they were waiting for her. A space opened in their circle, an unspoken invitation. To join them was to offer her own story, to have her small, human voice measured against the chorus of eternity. A cold wave of inadequacy washed over her. What was her grandmother's simple tale of kindness compared to the epic histories these beings wove? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, mortal rhythm in this timeless place. She could refuse. She could simply watch and listen, preserving her own fragile pride. But then she remembered the weight of the river's sorrow, the understanding that true peace was built from countless small acts, not just grand gestures. Her choice was made from that memory. She stepped into the circle, and all the shimmering faces turned to her. Her voice was small at first, a trembling thread in the vast silence. She did not speak of great battles or magical feats. She told them of her grandmother, on a winter night long ago, mending the torn cloak of a stranger with no expectation of reward, her hands gentle and her humming the only sound in their small, warm home. She spoke of the quiet peace that filled the room, a feeling so profound it had shaped Alara's entire understanding of the world. As she spoke, her words did not fade. They took on a silvery light, weaving themselves into the dancing script of the echoes, a new pattern of simple, human compassion added to their eternal story. The circle of spirits stilled. For a terrifying moment, she feared she had failed, that her story was too small, too insignificant. Then, one of the echoes drifted forward. It extended a hand of condensed light, and from its core, a single, crystallized tear fell into Alara's palm. It was cool and smooth, and it hummed with a gentle, protective energy that resonated deep within her bones. But the moment of acceptance was shadowed by a new fear. The echoes around her were flickering, their luminous forms growing faint at the edges. A collective sorrow passed through the glade, not as an emotion, but as a shared knowing. The fading of the Heartstone was causing them to weaken, to forget. Their very existence, and the preservation of every story they held, was tied to the stone's survival. Her success was no longer just about saving a place, but about saving memory itself. The crystallized tear in her hand pulsed, its gentle thrum a compass pointing the way. With a final, respectful bow to the fading storytellers, Alara turned and left the glade. The path downward grew steeper, and the air lost its evening chill, becoming steadily warmer, as if she were walking toward a slumbering giant's breath. The path descended into a valley where the very ground seemed to breathe. All around her, the hills themselves were not hills, but colossal forms curled in deep slumber, creatures of compacted earth and tangled, flowering vines so vast they had become part of the landscape. These were the slumbering giants, and the air vibrated with the low, resonant hum of their collective dreams. Every footstep had to be measured, every breath controlled. A single misplaced stone, a snapped twig, could shatter the fragile peace of this place and bring the mountains down upon her. The crystallized tear from the echoes pulsed in her palm, a cool, calming anchor against the rising tide of her own fear. It emitted a soft, soothing frequency that seemed to pacify the very air, and she watched as a giant nearby, its back a forest of young trees, shifted slightly in its sleep, then settled more deeply, comforted by the unseen energy. The Sentinel followed at a distance, its massive stone head dipping in a slow, unmistakable gesture of approval. Their partnership, silent and profound, was a thread of certainty in the precarious dance. Her progress was agonizingly slow, a test of patience against the frantic drum of her own heart. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to rush toward the growing warmth and the fading pulse of the Heartstone. But to rush was to risk everything. One wrong move could trigger a cataclysm, an avalanche of waking giants that would obliterate the path forward and seal the fate of the islands forever. The stakes were not just about her own survival, but about the silent, sleeping world around her. Then it happened. Just ahead, a smaller giant, no larger than a small hill, began to stir. It was young, its form less settled, a tangle of roots and soft earth. A low grumble emanated from its core, and the ground trembled as it started to uncurl, its vine-covered limbs shifting, its sleep disturbed by some unknown dream. Panic seized her. The crystal in her hand glowed brighter, but it was not enough. She needed more than a tool. She needed a connection. Closing her fingers around the crystal, she reached back into her own memory, past the fear, to the safest place she knew. She began to hum. It was the same simple, repetitive lullaby her grandmother had sung to her on countless nights, a melody of comfort and unconditional safety. Her voice was barely a whisper at first, then grew steadier, weaving the familiar tune into the giant's rumbling dreams. She poured all her intention into the sound, not as a command, but as an offering of peace. The effect was immediate. The young giant's movement stilled. Its low grumble softened into a contented sigh that rustled the leaves on its back. Slowly, gently, it curled back into its original position, the earth settling around it as it sank back into a deep, untroubled sleep. The immediate danger had passed, but the lesson was etched into her soul. The magic of this place did not respond to force or fear, but to empathy and shared memory. She moved forward again, her heart still pounding, but her resolve hardened. Reaching the far end of the valley, the source of the pervasive warmth became undeniable. A great, jagged opening yawned in the cliff face, leading not into darkness, but into a vast geothermal cavern from which a faint, rhythmic glow pulsed in time with the failing heartbeat of the world. The cavern was a forest of whispering crystal. Pillars of pale, translucent stone rose from the floor and descended from the ceiling, humming with a low, resonant energy. The air itself shimmered, and every thought that flitted through Alara's mind was caught and amplified, becoming a soft, audible sigh that echoed through the vast space. A moment of fear produced a chorus of anxious whispers. A flicker of hope created a ripple of gentle chimes. She had to master her own mind to quiet the storm of her emotions, or risk being lost in the cacophony of herself. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and focused everything she had on the single, central question that had brought her here. She pictured the Heartstone, not as she had seen it in the Sentinel's vision, fractured and fading, but as it must have been at the beginning, a perfect pillar of light. She poured her intent into the crystals, a silent, fervent plea to understand its history. The cavern answered. The whispers coalesced, weaving into a coherent narrative that played out not as a vision, but as a symphony of sound. She heard the golden age of the weavers, a chorus of harmonious voices in perfect accord with the Heartstone song. Then, a single voice began to rise above the others, not in celebration, but in ambition. This weaver, named Corval in the echoing memory, believed their peaceful existence was too fragile, too vulnerable. He proposed they use the Heartstone's energy not just to nurture, but to command, to shape the world into a perfect, unchanging fortress of peace. The other weavers resisted, their voices a chorus of gentle refusal, warning that to control was to corrupt. But Corval, convinced of his own righteous purpose, reached for the stone's core with an intent to dominate. The crystals screamed with the memory of the moment, a shattering dissonance that made Alara flinch. A single, prideful act, born from a desire for absolute safety, had fractured the Heartstone and sent the first cracks through the peace of the Isles. The truth settled in her stomach like a cold, heavy stone. The great schism she had felt in the river was not born of malice, but of a twisted form of love, a protective impulse taken too far. The legend was not a simple tale of good versus evil, but a cautionary one about the seductive danger of power, even when cloaked in peaceful intentions. She looked at her own hands, still clutching the echo's crystallized tear. She had already influenced this world, calming a giant with a lullaby, illuminating a path with a spoken word. Her quest to mend the stone was granting her a form of power, and the story of Corval was a stark mirror held up to her own heart. Would she, in her desire to fix this beautiful, broken world, also be tempted to force it into her own idea of what it should be? The choice was clear and humbling. She could not walk the same path as the fallen weaver. Kneeling on the cool cavern floor, she made a silent vow, not to the crystals, but to herself. She would not seek to master the Heartstone. She would not try to command its energy or reshape its purpose. Her only goal would be to offer it mending, to be a needle and thread for a torn tapestry, with no ownership over the final pattern. As this resolution solidified in her mind, quieting the last of her prideful doubts, the crystals responded with a final, soft chime of approval. Across the cavern, a section of the wall that had seemed solid began to glow with a soft, internal light. The rock itself shifted, not with violence, but with a gentle, fluid motion, revealing a new pathway that spiraled downward, a staircase of naturally formed stone steps that seemed to have been waiting for this exact moment, for this exact, resolved intent to finally appear. The staircase spiraled down into a profound darkness that swallowed all sound. Alara held the echo's crystal aloft, its soft silver light a fragile beacon that pushed back the shadows just enough to reveal each ancient, worn step. With every downward turn, the air grew heavier, saturated with a deep, thrumming magic that felt as old as the stone beneath her feet. It was the breath of the island itself, a pressure that made her ears pop and her heart feel slow and deliberate. Then, from the deepest pockets of shadow, small, curious lights began to emerge. They were no larger than her palm, shimmering spheres of gentle gold and blue that bobbed in the air around her, their presence a silent, questioning touch against her skin. They were spirits of the deep earth, drawn not by her power, but by the peaceful purpose that resonated from the crystal in her hand. A cold, sharp fear began to coil in her chest, the primal terror of being buried alive, of the immense weight of the world above pressing down. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness beyond her small circle of light, feeling endless and suffocating. Her breath hitched, and for a moment she was frozen, one hand pressed against the cool, damp stone wall. But then she looked at the circling lights. They were not afraid. They pulsed with a calm, steady rhythm, a silent counterpoint to her own frantic heartbeat. She focused on them, on their gentle, unwavering light, and used their presence as an anchor to pull herself back from the edge of panic. She was not alone here. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, she made a choice. She opened her free hand, palm up, in a gesture of invitation. "You are welcome with me," she thought, pouring all her gratitude and need into the silent words. The spirits understood. They swirled closer, their individual lights merging into a soft, collective glow that illuminated the staircase far better than her crystal alone. Her solitary descent transformed in an instant. She was no longer a single intruder in the deep places, but the center of a small, luminous procession. The staircase itself seemed to acknowledge this shift. The steps grew more uneven, the stone crumbling at the edges, as if the very structure was succumbing to a deep fatigue. A low, persistent groan echoed up from the depths, and the friendly lights around her flickered with a shared unease. They were showing her, without words, that the Heartstone's decay was not just an energy loss. It was a physical sickness, a destabilization that was causing the foundations of the Forgotten Isles to slowly, inexorably, come undone. Her mission was no longer abstract. Every precarious step was a race against the collapse of the world she walked upon. The spiral finally ended, opening abruptly into a cavern of impossible scale. The staircase gave way to a shore of fine, black sand, and before her stretched a vast, underground lake. Its waters were perfectly still, a sheet of obsidian glass that reflected the dim, fractured light emanating from a massive, half-submerged geode on the far side, its crystalline interior pulsing with a weak, faltering rhythm. A raft of petrified reeds waited at the water's edge, brittle and gray as old bone. It looked as if it would crumble at a touch, yet it held her weight without a sound as she stepped aboard. The moment the raft left the shore, the obsidian water grew perfectly, unnervingly still. Her own reflection stared back, not as a mere image, but with a knowing depth that seemed to pull at her very soul. The reflection's lips moved, its voice a perfect echo of her own, yet laced with a cold clarity. Why are you truly here, Ilara? For the glory of being the one to save a forgotten world? To prove your grandmother's fading mind was not lost to fantasy. The questions hung in the thick air, each one striking a chord of secret fear she had carried since the beach. The raft remained motionless, trapped by her silence. She tried to answer with the noble reasons she had told herself, but the reflection saw through each one, its gaze unwavering. The raft creaked, a single reed snapping and falling into the water with a soft plink. The truth was a weight in her chest, and she knew she could not hide from it. With a shuddering breath, she gave it voice. I am afraid, she whispered to her own eyes in the water. I am afraid that I have come all this way only to fail. That my voice is too small, my understanding too shallow, and that I will watch the last light of this place go out because I was not enough. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the stern judgment in her reflection's face softened into something resembling empathy. The water, which had been a pane of black glass, rippled gently. Acknowledging her fear did not make it vanish, but it robbed it of its power to paralyze her. The reflection spoke one last time, its tone now merely curious. Then why continue? What is it that makes this risk worth your potential failure? The answer came to her then, not as a rehearsed line, but as a simple truth rising from her core. It is for the stories themselves, she said, her voice growing stronger. Not for how they will make me remembered, but because they are beautiful. I love the quiet magic of a lullaby by calming a giant. I love the idea of peace woven into the roots of the world. I want that song to continue, even if no one ever knows I was here to hear it. The moment she spoke those words, a pure, selfless admission, the surface of the lake shimmered. The raft began to glide forward of its own accord, cutting a silent path through the dark water. It moved with a gentle, effortless grace, propelled not by wind or current, but by the truth she had finally offered. The test was not about being fearless or all-powerful. It was about being honest. Any hidden ambition, any desire for recognition, would have anchored her forever in the center of that dark lake. Her purity of intent was the only wind that could fill her sails here. As the far shore drew near, the geode loomed larger, its crystalline heart visible through a great crack in its stone shell. The light within pulsed erratically, a frantic, weakening flutter like the last beats of a dying heart. The raft nudged softly against a shore of polished stone, its purpose complete. She stepped onto the ground before the wounded Heartstone, the air humming with a dissonant, pained energy that vibrated deep in her bones. The final challenge was directly before her, and the fragile peace of the Forgotten Isles now depended entirely on the resolve she had just discovered. The geode's interior was a cathedral of fractured light. At its center, the Heartstone rose from a pool of still water, a pillar of pure crystal taller than 3 men. A single jagged crack ran down its length, pulsing with a sickly, irregular rhythm that cast frantic shadows across the cavern walls. The air itself felt wounded, each faltering pulse a stab of pain that vibrated through Alara's entire body. Without a word, the small spirits of earth and memory who had followed her descended. They swarmed the great crystal, pressing their gentle lights against the fracture, pouring their own energy into the wound. For a moment, it seemed to work. The crack blazed with a fierce, white-hot light, so brilliant it hurt to look upon. Hope surged in her chest, but the light did not heal. It only intensified, a scream of pure energy that could not mend the break. The crack remained, a dark scar in the heart of the light, and the spirits around it began to dim, their own essence draining away into a void that could not be filled. A cold dread washed over her. They were giving everything they had, and it was not enough. The direct approach, the application of pure force, was only hastening the collapse. The ground beneath her feet shuddered, a deep, groaning tremor that sent pebbles skittering across the stone floor. She was watching the final, frantic moments of a world bleeding out, and her one attempt to help was making it worse. Panic clawed at her throat, a frantic voice in her head, screaming that she had to do something, anything, before it was too late. But what was left? Her mind was a blank map. Then, a quieter thought surfaced through the noise, born from her failure in the Cavern of Whispers and her passage across the dark lake. She could not command this. She had to understand it. "Stop," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Please stop." The spirits hesitated, then drifted back from the stone, their lights now faint and weary. The fierce glow in the crack subsided, leaving the Heartstone looking more exhausted than ever, its light guttering like a candle in a storm. Alara stepped forward, her own fear a cold weight in her stomach. She did not raise her hands to push energy into the stone. Instead, she placed her palms flat against its cool, smooth surface. Closing her eyes, she emptied her mind of plans and solutions, of pride and fear of failure. She offered only a single, silent question. "What do you need?" For a long, terrifying moment, there was nothing but the stone's pained, erratic vibration and the growing tremors in the ground. Then, as if in answer, a memory rose from the depths of her own mind, a treasure salvaged from the river of memories. It was not a vision, but a sound, the song of the first accord, the simple, harmonious melody the weavers had used to weave peace into the world, a tune of pure connection that held no desire for control. The melody rose from her memory like a long-forgotten dream, a simple, lilting tune her grandmother had hummed while mending a torn cloak. Ilara's voice was a fragile thread at first, barely audible over the Heartstone's pained vibrations. But as the song of Mending left her lips, the air in the cavern changed. The frantic, dissonant energy softened, and the jagged crack in the great crystal began to pulse in time with the rhythm of her song. Where the song touched it, the fractured edges shimmered, softening like warmed wax, and slowly, impossibly, began to knit themselves back together. It was not a flashy magic, but a patient, deliberate mending, as if the crystal itself was remembering how to be whole. Yet the process demanded everything from her. The ground continued to tremble, a constant, distracting drumbeat of the island's instability. Her body ached with a deep exhaustion, and a voice of doubt whispered that her small human voice was an absurd tool against such a monumental break. To falter in her focus, to let a single note waver with fear or pride, was to risk the entire delicate process unraveling. The fate of the whispering forest, the slumbering giants, the very earth beneath her feet, all hung on the continuity of this one fragile melody. She made a choice then, a final, total surrender. Closing her eyes, she shut out the terrifying sight of the shuddering cavern. She poured every memory of peace she had ever known into the song, the quiet safety of her grandmother's hearth, the gentle understanding in the weaver's memory, the trusting sleep of the giant. She offered her belief in stories, in quiet magic, in the power of a simple lullaby to calm a world. Her spirit became the song, and the song became her only reality. The melody swelled, growing in strength and purity, no longer a hum, but a resonant, crystalline tone that filled the geode. The crack in the Heartstone responded, the two sides flowing together in a seamless dance of light, until only a faint, silvery line remained. With a final, soaring note that seemed to draw breath from the entire island, the last fracture sealed. A wave of pure, harmonious energy erupted from the stone, a brilliant, silent flash of light that filled the cavern not with blinding force, but with a profound, healing warmth. For a single, suspended moment, everything was still, perfect and whole. The wave of warmth washed over her, a tide of pure, silent music that flowed through the cavern and up into the world above. The violent tremors in the ground ceased as if they had never been, replaced by a deep, steady hum of stability. The small spirits, once so faint and weary, blazed with a brilliant, joyful light, swirling around the mended Heartstone in a dizzying, celebratory dance. Alara stood perfectly still, the echoes of her song still clinging to her, and watched the world heal itself. A profound exhaustion settled into her bones, not the draining fatigue of fear, but the deep, satisfying weariness of a task finally, completely done. For the first time, since she had stepped onto the Luminous beach, there was nothing for her to do, no immediate choice to make, no path to illuminate. The silence that returned to the cavern was entirely new. It was not the hollow, hungry quiet of the forgotten shores, but a deep, resonant stillness, heavy with peaceful potential, like the world holding its breath before a beautiful dawn. She slowly sank to her knees on the cool stone, her legs unable to support her any longer. Her role had shifted in an instant, from an active participant to a passive witness. The urge to do something, to guide the energy or shape the outcome, rose within her, a final ghost of the ambition that had felled the weaver Corval. She remembered his story, and she let the impulse go. She would not command this new beginning. She would simply be present for it, allowing the renewed balance to find its own form without her interference. This was the final, and perhaps the most difficult, lesson of the Isles. True peace required not just the courage to act, but the wisdom to know when to stop, to trust the world to continue its song without your hand on the instrument. As she sat in quiet observation, a new question began to form. delicate and uncertain. The immediate crisis was over. The stone was whole, but what did that mean for her? She was a woman from a world of noise and doubt, now sitting at the silent heart of a mended legend. Did her story end here, with the closing of the crack? Or had her journey woven her into the fabric of this place in a way that was now permanent, irrevocable? The air itself seemed to be listening, waiting with her for the answer, in a silence that was no longer empty, but full of promise. Her path back through the cavern felt less like a descent into darkness and more like a gentle ascent toward morning. The small, guiding lights that had once pushed back the shadows now swirled around her in playful, celebratory arcs, their golden and blue glows reflecting off the newly stable stone. The oppressive weight of the deep earth was gone, replaced by a light, buoyant energy that seemed to lift her steps. When she emerged from the spiral staircase, the valley of the slumbering giants was bathed in a soft, pre-dawn glow. The great forms were still, but their slumber was different. The deep, resonant hum of their dreams was now a harmonious, soothing drone, and the very air felt settled, as if the mountains themselves were exhaling in profound relief. Where before she had walked on a knife's edge of fear, she now moved through a sanctuary of absolute peace. Crossing the river of memories, she found the water clearer than glass. The visions of the weavers were no longer fractured echoes of joy and sorrow, but complete, flowing scenes of reconciliation and gentle purpose. She saw them mending the ancient schism, not with grand declarations, but with quiet conversations and shared labor, their light interweaving once more. The water held no painful weight for her now, only the calm certainty of a lesson fully learned, and in the whispering woods, the symphony of the trees had transformed. The fragmented, overlapping whispers wove together into a single, contented melody, a wordless song of gratitude that rustled through the leaves and settled on her skin like a blessing. Every element of the island recognized her, not as a savior, but as a friend who had shared in its deepest pain and helped restore its true voice. A bittersweet ache bloomed in her chest, growing with every peaceful step. Her success was a joy so profound it felt fragile, yet it was inextricably tied to the knowledge that she did not belong here. This was not her home. She was a visitor from a world of noise and haste, and her time in this silent, mending world was fleeting. So she made a conscious choice to walk slowly, to breathe deeply of the scented air, to let her fingers trail over the bark of a whispering tree. She was not just a traveler retracing her steps. She was a storyteller at work, etching every sensory detail into her memory, the specific quality of the light, the texture of the moss, the exact pitch of the forest's hum. The burden of her task settled upon her shoulders, not as a weight, but as a sacred honor. She was now the sole living keeper of the completed legend, the only one who could carry the true story of the Forgotten Isles back to a world that had forgotten how to listen for such quiet magic. The responsibility was immense, a quiet vow she made with every memorized detail. When she finally stepped back onto the beach, the sight of her small boat stopped her heart for a moment. It was no longer the worn, salt-stained vessel she had arrived in. Its wood gleamed as if freshly oiled. Its sails were neatly furled with new, strong rope, and it sat ready in the shallow water, waiting. The island itself had prepared her departure, a final, silent gesture of thanks for the song she had returned to its heart. The great stone Sentinel was waiting for her on the Luminous beach. It stood as still as a cliff, its patient gaze fixed upon her. As she approached, the immense creature lowered its head, the grinding of ancient stone, a soft, deliberate sound. There, resting in the sand before its massive foreleg, was a small, perfectly smooth stone that had fallen from its own shell. It glowed with a soft, internal light, the same gentle amber as the Sentinel's awakened eyes. Ilara knelt, her fingers closing around the gift. It was warm to the touch, and the moment she held it, a wave of profound understanding passed through her. This was more than a keepsake. It was a seal upon their bond, a physical piece of the island's truth that would anchor her memories and give weight to her words when she told the story. Holding it, she knew she could never doubt what she had experienced, and neither would those who heard her tale with an open heart. A deep, conflicting ache opened within her chest. The desire to stay in this mended, peaceful world was a powerful, physical pull. To live among the whispering trees and slumbering giants, to feel the harmonious pulse of the Heartstone as a constant rhythm in her life, felt like the fulfillment of a destiny she never knew she had. It was a personal paradise found, but the face of her grandmother and the fading light in her eyes as the old stories slipped away rose vividly in her mind. Her purpose had never been to simply find peace for herself. It was to be a bridge, a voice for the voiceless, to ensure that the quiet magic of this place did not vanish from the world's memory a second time. The conflict was a silent storm, a tearing choice between the heart's deepest desire and the soul's most sacred duty. She looked from the glowing stone in her hand to the patient, ancient face of the Sentinel, and then to her waiting boat. The choice was hers alone. To stay would be to protect the legend, but to let it remain forgotten. To leave would be to risk the story being misunderstood or dismissed in the noisy world, but it was the only chance for it to live on. Her purpose was not to hide within the legend, but to carry it outward, with a resolve that felt both like a victory and a profound loss. She made her decision. She would go. She turned her back on the sanctuary, her feet carrying her toward the sea with a heavy finality. The emotional stakes of that single action were staggering. Leaving meant this direct, tangible connection to the magic would end. The warm stone in her palm would have to be enough, a single star to navigate by in a world of doubt, a testament to a truth she must now hold on faith and memory alone. Pushing the boat into the calm water, she climbed aboard and took up the oars. She turned for one last look. The Sentinel stood sentinel on the shore, a silent, eternal guardian. As she watched, the low mists that she had parted days before began to gently gather, flowing like a soft, gray tide over the shimmering sand and the edges of the emerald forest. They did not rush, but moved with a slow, deliberate grace, weaving a veil between her world and the one she was leaving behind. The forgotten isles were returning to their solitude, their secrets once again guarded by silence and sea. The outline of the Sentinel blurred, then vanished into the luminous gray, and the last thing she saw was the gentle, pulsing light of her gift, a tiny, steadfast beacon in the growing mist as the current slowly carried her home. The sea itself seemed to carry her home. The gentle current that had pulled her into mystery now pushed her away from it, her boat gliding across water as smooth as polished stone. Above, the stars burned with a fierce, clean clarity, and when she unrolled her grandmother's charts, the ink no longer wavered. The constellations were fixed in their ancient positions, and a single, luminous line traced a direct and safe path back to Ethel, a route written in starlight and certainty. The journey was swift and serene, a quiet interlude that stood in perfect contrast to the tense uncertainty of her arrival. This was the harmony she had helped restore, made manifest in the calm of the waves and the favorable wind that filled her sails without her bidding. Yet within this peaceful passage, a quiet conflict began to brew. The absence of struggle felt almost like an anticlimax. After facing sentient forests and mending the heart of the world, the simple, physical act of sailing home seemed too ordinary, too small for the weight of what she carried. Her mind raced ahead to her village, to the familiar faces of fisher folk and farmers, their lives built on the tangible realities of weather and harvest. How could she possibly explain the melody that mends stone, or the silent language of slumbering giants? Her story felt like a dream, even to her, a beautiful, fragile soap bubble that would pop at the first touch of pragmatic disbelief. She spent the long, quiet hours not in panic, but in deliberate preparation. With the Sentinel's warm stone held tightly in one hand, she sifted through her memories, organizing the epic into something she could carry in her voice. She decided she would not lead with the grand spectacle of the geode's light or the Sentinel's immense size. Those were the ornaments of the tale, not its heart. She would begin with the message, with the quiet truth she had learned at such great cost. She would speak of balance, of how true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the choice to mend what is broken with empathy rather than force. She would tell them that the greatest strength often looks like gentle patience, and that some stories are not meant to be conquered, but listened to. The success of her entire quest now hinged on this final, fragile act of transmission. The physical peace of the Forgotten Isles was secure, but its legacy, its continued existence in the memory of the world, was now entirely contained within her. If she failed to make them believe, if her words were dismissed as the ravings of a sun-addled sailor, the beautiful, mended world she had touched would fade into myth once more, its lessons lost to a world that desperately needed them. This was the final, invisible thread connecting her to the Isles, a thread woven from trust and the power of a story faithfully told. As the sun rose on her fourth day at sea, the familiar, sturdy coastline of Ethel hardened on the horizon, its simple shapes of wood and stone, a stark and sobering contrast to the luminous wonders she had been forced to leave behind. The familiar wooden dock felt like a dream beneath her feet, solid and yet strangely unreal after the luminous sands of the Isles. Villagers gathered, their faces a sea of relief at her safe return, quickly clouded by confusion at her serene composure. you.